What's up my friends, how's it going, and welcome back to the long-awaited Faction Overview series with your fellow comrade Samrajya. As most of you know, I'd taken a long hiatus from my YouTube channel, and that is because I've been focusing on the priority, which is my modding for the Divided Impera team, so that you guys can get a quicker access to the 1.3.5 public beta. And speaking of the new public beta, of course, the faction we are going to cover in this episode is none other than the Maurya Samrajya. Of course, I am going to be doing a video that I will explain all of the changes, and it's pretty massive change in the 1.3.5 public beta. But for this video, I do believe the Mauryans deserve a special mention because a lot has changed. In fact, I personally have made the changes to the Mauryan faction. Of course, I worked closely with Sergeant Meme Swaraj. He was busy in real life and unfortunately wasn't really able to help me out that much, but he did provide some key support. Apart from that, I do want to thank Cam from the Divided Impera team for helping with the unit balance. So most of you, if you feel that the units are a little bit powerful, it's not that powerful. I have run it by the man himself, Cam. Of course, I do thank Q Sartorius as well for helping with the faction traits and the new army traditions available for the Mauryan faction. More on that later. And finally, of course, the big man himself, Dresden, for compiling all of it together and making this vision a reality. However, without any further ado, let us hop into the Mauryan faction. And the Mauryan faction is part of the Bharatha faction group. As such, it has two buffs: exotic weapons, new buffs. And the exotic weapons give -10 cost and upkeep for elephant and chariot units. Previously, this used to be taskmasters or task lords, which only used to affect elephant units, but now it also affects chariot units, which tend to be quite expensive. So it's a welcome change, of course, and it's a pretty powerful and significant buff, especially in the early game when you do not have the economy to support such expensive exotic units. Next up, we have Populous, which gives increased growth per turn. Now, this trait has been completely changed. Previously, it was multiculturalism, which allowed the Mauryans to handle the various cultures around them a bit more effectively. But now with the Populous, it's a much more stronger buff. What this does is it does increase the growth per turn of your settlements, allowing you to quickly build up your settlements. This buffs make more sense in terms of the Indian subcontinent being so heavily densely populated. So yeah, I convinced Q Sartorius to include this because this makes more sense from, of course, the context of the Indian subcontinent. What this also means is that you will soon be able to deal with public order issues, because the more your settlement grows, the more access you get to buildings, which means you can build military buildings, you can build up your economy faster, you can build up your public order faster, your sanitation and so forth. So very powerful buff, and it is applicable throughout the game. So it's not just a strong buff in the early game. Of course, it does have a more pronounced effect in the early game. However, it is still quite useful in the late game. Then under the Bharatha faction group, you have just one singular faction, and that is the Maurya Samrajya, or rather the Mauryan Empire. And as such, they get three modifiers, two of which are buffs, and the last one is a debuff. Speaking of the buffs, you have Spice Routes, which gives increased trade income. This is pretty significant in the early game, where trade accounts for at least 50% of your economy. However, in the context of the Mauryans, you have to keep in mind that we do not have access to the Mediterranean Sea, which means also in the early game we will not have a lot of opportunities to establish that many trade partners, as opposed to if you were positioned on the coast of the Mediterranean. Next up, we have the Forge Masters. Now, the Forge Masters is a particularly powerful buff. It does give increased melee infantry damage. Now, what this means is that any weapon that's considered to be of the category used by melee infantry, not spear infantry, so not pikes, not hoplites, not regular spears, not shock spears, but melee weapons such as axes, maces, swords, sickles and so forth, or two-handed swords, will apply. But it will not just apply to melee infantry. The tooltip is a bit wrong over here, but it applies to melee weapons. So this means if you have a cavalry unit that uses a melee weapon, that melee weapon is going to be also affected by this buff. The same goes for melee weapons used by missile infantry, or even melee weapons used by missile cavalry and so forth. You get the idea. Now this is a very powerful buff. It's applicable throughout the campaign. Doesn't matter if it's the early game or the late game. Especially in the early game, you're going to see a bit more of an effect, because of course it's going to inch you a little bit in terms of quality versus your adversaries. However, in the late game, it's always a welcome buff, although you might not necessarily require it in the late game when you simply outnumber your adversaries. This buff is very similar. In fact, it's the exact same as the Get A buff, which is Swordmasters, as you can see over here. So it's one of the most powerful traits that you can have in the game. So that's actually really good. And the reason why I requested Q Sartorius to put this in is because India historically had a rich tradition of ironsmithing, and in fact India actually skipped the Bronze Age because iron was in such abundance in the subcontinent. So the Bronze Age in India had a very short blip in history, and they kind of spearheaded or rocketed themselves ahead of time into ironsmithing. In fact, Indian ironworking was one of the most advanced in the entire world. The more famous Damascus steel that is known in Europe was actually originated from India, known as the wood steel in India. Of course, that technology has been lost during our colonial history, but at the time that it was available, it was the most prized metal for weapon making, of course. And apart from that, for those of you who know a little bit more about India, you will know that we actually have a famous iron pillar in our capital, Delhi. And this is a pillar of iron that has actually been exposed for thousands of years to the elements and hasn't even rusted. So yeah, Indian metalworking extremely advanced for its time. And lastly, we have the Eastern Invaders. This one is a debuff. It gives a public order penalty to all of your regions, which is pretty significant in the early game when you are struggling for public order, which means early game expansion might have to be a little bit slower because you're not going to be able to deal with the public order issues. But thankfully, because we are populous, we have more growth per turn, which means we can unlock more settlement building slots, and we can counteract that public order penalty quite effectively. So all in all, very good traits for the Mauryan faction, a little bit more in tune to what the Mauryan faction should embody. However, that being said and done, we are going to move on to the next section of our guide. Keep in mind that this guide is going to be a 5-part series, beginning with the introduction, which we just completed, followed by, of course, a overview of the faction roster, followed by my personal recommendation of an army composition based on the campaign considerations, so population, class, unit caps, so forth. And finally, we're going to try to test that composition against a typical Roman Marian legion and see how well we perform against that legion. And we're going to analyze the battle statistics after the battle has concluded, and I'm going to give my opinion on the units, of course. And a final section is usually our general skills and army traditions that I personally recommend that synergizes well with the faction. However, I'm just going to add a little bit more and to that section, and that is basically I'm going to cover the new military building chains available to the Mauryan faction, because that is the pretty significant change that is there for the Mauryan faction. However, without any further ado, let us hop on to the next section of this video, in which I will be covering each and every single unit available to the Mauryan faction roster. Alright, welcome to the second section of our guide, in which I will be covering the Mauryan roster. As you can see, I have laid out my Mauryan army in that typical formation, with our generals in the first group, followed by melee infantry, spear infantry, missile infantry, melee cavalry, missile cavalry, chariots, as well as elephant units. And very quickly, let's just adjust these units over here. One, and let's go there and there. So that should just give a little bit of a gap between those units. But as you can see, the Mauryan faction roster is massive as it should be. It's been brought up to speed with some of the other empires or large factions in the campaign, such as the Carthaginians have a pretty massive roster. The Romans, of course, have the biggest roster available if you count the auxilia options available to them. But the Mauryans were lacking, and I felt that they needed to be properly represented in the game. What's more is that I've actually added 2 types of auxilia units for the Mauryan faction, as the Mauryan faction historically relied on local auxilia. And the 2 types of auxilia units are the Vedic auxilia. So for those who are not Indian and don't understand what that means, it's basically in the Indian subcontinent, all of the people who adhered to Hinduism, the religion, were classified as certain castes or social classes, such as the first class in the game is considered Kshatriya, although technically it's Brahmin, which are the priestly class, but they weren't involved in warfare. Meanwhile, the Kshatriyas, they were the warrior class as well as the aristocracy, as well as the rulers, whereas the Brahmins, the priestly class, were more of their advisors as well as their military advisors as well, because they were the ones who were literate, so they kept records of military campaigns, and as such they had more knowledge than the warriors themselves on military doctrines, warfare tactics, as well as they guided the warriors on the ethics that they should follow in the battle, of course keeping in line with the Hindu tradition. Apart from that, you have the second class, which is the Vaishya or the merchant class, and followed by which you have the population class 3, which is represented by the Shudras or the labor class, and which are basically the commoners. And finally you have the Mlecha. Now the Mlecha are foreigners. They were not part of the Vedic culture, which means they did not follow the Hinduism religion. As such, they were considered outside the caste system, outside the Vedic caste system, and as such they did not have a designated caste to them. Now what this means in terms of the Mauryan faction, of course, before we dive into this, it means that there are going to be 2 kinds of auxilia. Basically, Mauryans are an ethnicity within India, and India is a massive subcontinent. You have ethnicities all across India. You have the South Indian Dravidians, you have the West Indian Sindhis, as well as Sauvirians, you have the Avanti, which are central India, you have the Malyans. All of these units are represented in the game, the Malyans being from the Indo-Gangetic plain, so a bit of northeastern India to be precise. But all of these do follow the Vedic culture, which means despite them being auxiliary units, unlike the Roman auxiliary units, these guys do draw from their relevant population class, which in most cases is that Pop 2 Vaishya class. However, considering that they actually draw from the population class that's not foreign, they are not capped. So you have unlimited access to these auxiliary units. Conversely speaking, you have the foreign auxilia. These are the Mlecha. Now the Mlecha are foreigners, so they do not fall under the Vedic umbrella. They do not practice Hinduism. These include the foreigners such as the Saka, the Cambodians, which are Indo-Iranian and Hellenic mix. You have the Gandharans. You have quite a lot of foreign troops, of course. And another group of Mlechas are actually indigenous to the Indian subcontinent. They are basically the tribal Indians. Now, tribal Indians were isolated from Indian civilization. As such, they stayed in, remote areas and forested areas, and such were not exposed to Hinduism as a religion, which means they were still considered as outsiders despite being indigenous to the subcontinent. But these guys, since they all draw from the foreign population class, they will be too overpowered if there's no campaign cap to these units. So just keep in mind the Mlecha units do have a campaign cap similar to the Roman auxilia that draw from the 4th class population, but conversely have a campaign cap. However, that being said and done, the next thing I would like to cover is that with the new Mauryan units, there are 3 bow entries. Now, this is a question I have received on the Divided Impera Discord specifically. So before I dive into it, I'm going to talk about the 3 bow entries available to the Mauryan faction. The first bow entry is a All of them use longbows, but the first one is a shorter range, as you can see with this unit over here, but it's a faster rate of fire and less damage. So it's more about expending your ammunition as quickly as possible and getting into melee. It's typically used by hybrid units and low tier units. The second type of bow is going to be your medium range longbow, and this is actually, medium range is an understatement because it's going to have 190 range, which is much greater than some of the most elite bows out there. However, the damage is moderate, so it's not too powerful. And the final one is, of course, your strongest recurved composite bow, longbow, which actually has the maximum range of 210, which is equal to your Balearic Slinger range and your Rhodian Slinger range. So pretty insane and pretty respectable damage. However, without any further ado, let us hop right into the very first group, and the very first unit we are going to discuss are the Mauryan Royal Bodyguard Sword unit. Now these guys, you can take a look at just how they look, the new assets, the new texturing, the new shields, the curved shields, proper geometry, everything been done. Now I can of course spend an eternity describing all of the changes I've made, especially with the standard bearer, the peacock standard. As you can see, this particular standard bearer is wearing all the other accessories on him. Of course the dhoti has been, or the Indian skirt rather, has been modified, but that would take forever, so I'm just going to skip on that. I'm just going to mention assets if it's important to the understanding of the roster, but apart from that, you can pause the video wherever you like just to get a better look at the units. Moving back to the topic at hand, of course, we have the Mauryan Royal Bodyguards. These are a sword unit, very similar to what they were before. Population class 1, 200 men in the unit, really decent melee attack of 15, melee defense of 12, and weapon damage of 36 overall, out of which 11 is armor piercing. Most of the weapon damage bonus is versus elephant units. Now this, as most of you know from my previous video, actually adds on to the overall weapon damage as well as to the melee attack. So what this means, the bonus versus elephants is 23 plus 15, which means they have 38% attack or 38 melee attack versus elephants. As far as the damage is concerned, it's going to be split pretty evenly to the ratio between the armor piercing as well as weapon damage. So what this means is your overall weapon damage of 36 is going to be bumped up to 59, which is absolutely insane against elephants. And out of that 59, you might say about 40 will be base weapon damage, and the remaining 19 might be armor piercing. So really powerful against elephant units. Now their armor is 38, which isn't the best armor. Of course, you can see many of them are exposed and have a lot of skin showing, and that's just the way how Mauryans were. They weren't really heavily armored in the subcontinent. Tends to be pretty hot, so of course they can't be heavily armored, but they're as heavily armored as armored can be, and as such they are being awarded with that 38 armor. Apart from that, of course, we do have a new icon over here. You might notice that their speed is no longer being displayed over here. That is because in the 1.3.5 public beta, you have these new icons for every single unit of the game. Of course, there are a lot of errors still that are being ironed out by Cam, but this is basically Cam's innovation. If you mouse over the icon, you get a bit of a tooltip explaining to you what the icon means. Now, the icon consists of two main elements. I would say the first element is, of course, the Roman numeral that you see over here, and you can see the number 2, and basically that indicates the speed of the unit, with 1 being the lowest speed or very low, 2 being low, 3 being medium, 4 being very high, and 5 being extremely fast. And the second element you have to look out for is, of course, the color of the icon itself. So over here you can see the color is green, or a dark green rather. What this means in case of infantry, it indicates their charge resistance. So that means if they are charged upon by an enemy, they're going to be more resilient if they have a higher charge value. Now once again, this color has 5 tiers represented by 5 different colors, beginning with red signifying the lowest charge resistance, orange signifying low, yellow signifying medium, green that you can see in this case signifies high, and light green signifies very high. So it's a bit of a color spectrum all the way from red to light green. And of course, the best charge resistance is going to be purple, which is, going to be excellent because, beyond green, if you take a look at most of the tier lists, purple signifies the S tier rating. So whenever you see purple, that means the unit has excellent charge resistance if it's an infantry unit. If it's a cavalry unit, this charge resistance is instead a charge strength. So it kind of signifies how good the cavalry is at performing a charge or dealing charge damage to an enemy unit. However, that being said and done, you can take a look at this unit. It has good charge resistance, so it's capable of withstanding some enemy charges. But at the same time, the speed is only 2, so I wouldn't recommend this as a general on the field of battle. Because you could be caught in a very bad situation where you're trying to escape the engagement and you might not be able to, and you might end up losing your general on the field of battle and subsequently end up losing the battle as a result of that huge morale penalty from general being killed on the battlefield. Apart from that, you might not even be able to move your general about effectively on the battlefield and apply buffs and debuffs to your enemies and of course your compatriots. So definitely not a good general on the field of battle, but in a narrow street, this general can do quite well, especially in unwalled settlements as well as walled settlements. So I would definitely recommend this general as a good governor general, because this general right here is going to be the cheapest option available to you. However, moving on to the next unit, you have the Mauryan Royal Bodyguard Cavalry. Now, this is the cavalry variant of the exact same unit, and I did forget to mention with this unit, the weapon damage is due to the asset that they have. This is the famous Nistrimsa sword, and basically it's a precursor of the much more famous Talwar sword for some of you Indian viewers who understand what that means. But for most of you with a European background or a Western background, what that means is that this sword is actually the inspiration for your European sabers. Alright, so these swords eventually became the Talwar, which eventually made its way to the Arab world, since the Arab world was the intermediary between India and the Europeans up until the Portuguese figured out a way to navigate around the African subcontinent, around the Cape of Good Hope. But eventually these swords would influence Europeans to, make their own version, which was the sabers that were used especially by the cavalry. And you can see these exact same swords on the next unit, which is the Mauryan Royal Bodyguard. It's a cavalry unit. Pretty similar stats to the Mauryan infantry bodyguard unit. 14 melee attack, 9 melee defense, overall weapon damage of 34, 9 of which is armor piercing, a lot of bonus versus infantry of 3, and just a moderate bonus versus cavalry. Of course, a lot of the bonus will be retained versus elephants as well. Now, this is a much better general unit to use on the field of battle, especially because it's going to have more mobility, which means you can get disengage a lot easier, and you can move your general into the trouble spots on the battlefield. But more importantly, it's the speed. Now, the speed isn't all that much. It's pretty medium, which means it's about 6 to 7 movement speed in the if you consider the old metric that's no longer displayed over here. The charge resist strength is medium because it's not a spear shock cavalry, it's a melee cavalry, and even more so, it's not just a melee cavalry, it's a sword cavalry, so it's not going to have a pretty devastating charge. It's not an anti-cav cavalry, which means if you get involved in a cavalry engagement, your general is going to be in a pretty dicey situation. But ideally, you do not want your general to be in cavalry engagement, because you do not want your general to be stuck in a situation he can't get out of. Now, if you're up against enemy cavalry and you're fighting with your general against enemy cavalry and you decide it's not going too well for you, you might want to pull out, but the enemy cavalry is going to be able to chase you quite easily. Conversely, if you use your general's cavalry to fight infantry, if you feel that the situation is not looking good and you need to quickly disengage, you can do so without fear of being pursued. So definitely a sword cavalry general is going to be quite useful against enemy infantry, especially because they have a bonus versus enemy infantry, which means you can use this general unit to hunt down a lightly armored enemy infantry, as well as some of the heavier enemy infantry, so long as they are not threatening you. But as far as the options are concerned, as a general on the field of battle, this is one of the 2 options I would personally recommend. Next up, we have the Mauryan heavy armored chariots. Now, these units have not received much of a change stat-wise in the public beta, with the only exception being that they have been bumped up to super heavy chariots, but they only have a 40 men instead of 60 in the unit, so they're going to be a lot more fragile. They are by far the fastest moving cavalry unit for the Mauryans as a general option, but I wouldn't really recommend them as a general because chariot units tend to be a bit of a glass cannon. What I mean by glass cannon is that they can really have a explosive impact on damage, but they are also very vulnerable to receiving damage, so definitely would not recommend these guys. Just one bad volley of javelins or just one bad charge into spear units or getting bogged down means you're pretty much certainly going to lose your general, because these guys drop like flies. But if you use them correctly, they can by far be the most damaging unit on the field of battle. But once again, would not recommend this as a general unit, but would definitely recommend it as part of your overall army structure. Next up, we have the final general option, and these are the Mauryan Royal War Elephants. 28 elephants in the unit. However, it displays as 48 because each elephant is paired with a rider as well as a warrior atop the howdah. So that's 24 elephants times 2. Most of the elephant units in game just have 18 elephants in the unit. 24 for the Mauryans means that they have more numerous elephants, which makes them a much more stronger. Of course, their armor value, as you can tell just by the appearance of these bad boys, is extremely high for an elephant unit, and they also come with the Indian elephant entity. Now, the Indian elephant entity is the strongest war elephant ever in history of mankind. I know a lot of you will say, but African elephants are bigger, and you're not wrong, but you are wrong. The African elephants that are absolutely big, they are completely untamable. So you'll never find a human on the back of an African elephant. And if you do, that's going to be a marvelous feat. Those elephants are completely untamable. The elephants used by the Carthaginians were the African forest or the North African forest elephant. Unfortunately, they are no longer, in existence. They have been made extinct by the Romans, who used them in the circuses. And for several other reasons, they were hunted for ivory, used in warfare, and so forth. However, when it comes to the elephants used in a war situation, Indian elephants were the biggest elephants available. In fact, the Seleucids beat the Ptolemies on the Battle of Raphia simply because the African elephants that were used by the Ptolemies were too afraid to engage the bigger sized Indian elephants. Apart from that, this elephant unit does come with warriors equipped with the best longbow, a recurved composite longbow, so they're going to be able to do quite a lot of damage atop the elephant. And I would recommend this as a general unit as well. So you have 2 choices when it comes to your generals. You have the elephants and you have the bodyguard cavalry unit. Personally, I would go with the elephants just because they are much harder to kill, and even though they are slightly slower than your cavalry unit, they are going to be able to get out of any situation quite easily because they just have so much mass that they can just push through an enemy with relative ease. When it comes to their movement stats, you can see that they have very low movement speed but excellent charge strength. What this means is that they're going to be able to dish out a lot of damage. Now, previously you could not tell the charge strength and the charge resistance of a unit, but now thanks to Cam and his new innovative way of displaying these, you can kind of understand. And there you have that Tyrian purple explaining that this elephant unit has excellent charge strength. Now, how does charge actually work in the game? It has nothing to do with the charge bonus. Now, charge bonus is just a bonus applied to the damage your unit deals immediately after the charge, and it's more of a timer. So the longer your charge bonus, the longer the time of the bonus you get against a unit just immediately after the charge. But the actual charge damage is calculated based on the charge speed, which is not the movement speed, or not to be confused with the movement speed of the unit. So just before the unit charges against enemy, you will see that it kind of has a sprint animation. So it's that speed versus the mass of the unit. Now, that multiplicative applies or calculates against the unit you're up against. So if you're charging against Maurya Royal Bodyguards, their mass is pretty high, so they're not going to be taking too much damage from an elephant charge. However, if you're charging against lightly armored units like the Mauryan Reserve Infantry, which we'll cover in the next group, as you can see, they have actually quite low charge resistance, so they are going to be absolutely annihilated by the charge. So that's a bit of how it works. However, without any further ado, let us hop on to the next group, which is the melee infantry. As you can see, we have quite a lot of melee infantry as the Mauryan faction. You see, we have quite a lot of missile infantry as well, and these two are the main focus of the Mauryan faction. Of course, you do have special units like the chariots and elephants. I forgot to mention that before. As you can see, the Mauryan faction is quite lopsided towards melee infantry and missile infantry. And of course, although the exotic units might seem a few, they are actually quite significant, considering not many factions have access to exotic units at all, and even the factions that do get access to exotic units do not have that many variety when it comes to exotic units. Now, you might think we do have quite a lot of cavalry options, but I'll get to that in a bit, and you'll see why it is deceptive but not the reality. However, moving back on to the melee infantry, the very first melee infantry, you have the Mauryan Reserve Infantry. These guys are 300 men strong, come from that third class population, very easily accessible in the early game, but I wouldn't really recommend them in the mid to late game, because they're not going to be able to do too much in the mid to end game. They have pretty mediocre stats: 7 melee attack, which is pretty low, 6 melee defense, again quite low. The weapon damage is respectable for a pop 3 unit, overall of 27, 8 of which is armor piercing. They do have a decent amount of speed, so these units can be used effectively as flanking type units. Their weapon entry denotes that they have a mixture of axes, sickles, swords, clubs, maces, whatever you want to call it. But once again, they're not going to be able to do too well, especially as frontline troops. You can see they're barely armored, so they're going to take quite a lot of damage. So yeah, definitely wouldn't recommend this unit for too long. But however, in the early game, when you want to conserve your more important population class and expend your more easy to come by population 3, you can definitely hire these guys. Next up, we have the Mauryan Axemen. Once again, 300 men in the unit, but these guys are the best of the Shudra population class 3. As you can tell, they come from finer stock, a bit bulkier looking, heavy, muscular looking men, because they do wield the two-handed axe, the parashu, and they do not have any shield. So you can see their melee attack is 14, their melee defense is only 3. They do not have any protection from missiles, so these guys can be absolutely shredded if not used right, but they do have good movement speed. Their charge resistance is low, so they're not a frontline unit, keep that in mind. You use them as a flanking unit because they have a lot of speed, and they have a lot of weapon damage of total of 34, 9 of which is armor piercing, and a massive bonus versus elephants of 21. They have slightly better armor, as you can see with some of the waistbands over here. Their armor is at 8, so they're not entirely exposed like the Mauryan Reserve infantry, but these guys really good at flanking, especially in the early game. Expendable, cheap, and numerous, and really cheap counter to elephant units, because you have an elephant units versus these guys, and my money is on these guys winning that engagement. It's basically about the morale, who breaks morale first. But in most cases, these guys just have so many units that if you get a very good charge off against the elephant unit and it's bogged down, then these guys are going to come off on top. Next up, we have the Mauryan Macemen. Now, these guys are one of my favorite units because they are the poster child for the Mauryan faction. A lot of the Mauryan depictions actually depict these kind of warriors, melee warriors, wielding a one-handed mace paired with bell shields. As you can see over here, they're 200 men strong, similar stats to the original Mauryan Macemen. However, they have been nerfed as far as their armor is concerned. They have 10 armor, but the buff that they have been given is their speed. So this allows them to be a lot more capable as flanking type units. They do have a pretty good weapon damage, medium stats as far as melee attack and melee defense is concerned. The weapon damage overall at 32, 16 of which is armor piercing, so these bad boys are going to be absolutely devastating against heavily armored units. And of course, they are not going to be frontline troops. They don't have a lot of charge resistance. That should say charge resistance instead of charge strength because it's not a cavalry unit. And it is something I have notified Cam, so he will fix that tooltip. Their speed is medium, which means they can get into a very good flanking position quite easily. Wouldn't recommend using these guys as frontline troops. Use them for what they're meant to be, good shock flanking infantry. Next up, we have our very first auxiliary unit, and this auxiliary unit is the Malian heavy infantry hailing from the Indo-Gangetic plains. They are part of the Vedic group. As such, they come from the second class population, 200 men in the unit, equipped with a large wooden bell shield and swords. They have very respectable stats for a population class 2 unit: 13 melee attack, 11 melee defense, very good missile protection. Overall weapon damage of 30, which is really good for a sword unit, 2 of which is armor piercing, pretty standard. Armor of 25, which is quite respectable, and they also come with a precursor javelin. Speaking of precursor javelin, I'm really quickly gonna hop onto the cavalry over here. I did mention that they are not gonna be that good against enemy cavalry, but they do have a ace up their sleeve when it comes to enemy cavalry, and it's that they have 6 precursor javelins, and these 6 precursor javelins can pretty much stop a charge of an enemy cavalry, and then they can counter charge and get a clean charge off. But beyond that, of course, if they get bogged down in a fight versus enemy cavalry, they are going to take some significant casualties. But moving back to the Malian heavy infantry, really good unit. Once again, you might see with this sword unit, not you know, typically shining in any particular role on the battlefield. A bit of a jack of all trades, so not you know, decent on front line, but not amazing on the front line, and decent in flanking, but not amazing on the flanking. So this is one of the changes I made. Previously, these guys were the allied swordsmen, but now they are the auxiliary Malian heavy infantry. Next up, we have an upgraded version of our favorite poster child, the Mauryan late armored macemen. Of course, unlocked after the reforms. You can see they have pretty much similar stats to the Mauryan macemen, but these guys more heavily armored at 35. They retain their high movement speed, so they're still quite good at flanking the enemy units. They have a little bit better melee attack and melee defense, and a slightly better mace weapon entry with an overall weapon damage of 33, 16 of which comes from armor piercing. I definitely recommend these guys on the battlefield. They still come from that population class 2, and very respectable unit. They do have that small buckler, which is an upgraded version of the earlier small bell shields that these guys have, but stat wise very similar, just with the exception of better armor. Next up, we have a very interesting unit, the Mauryan Guild Warriors, or the Sreni Warriors. These guys are actually merchants that were hired to protect convoys. As such, they come with a two-handed sword and a attached shield on the elbow, similar to your Phalangite units, as well as some of your Cataphract type units. So they do have a little bit of missile protection. They come from that second class population, 200 men in the unit, really good melee attack stats at 15, decent melee defense, nothing too fancy, still quite vulnerable as you can tell to missile units, good movement speed, decent charge resistance, and of course the beauty of this unit is of course the melee weapon damage overall at 36, 11 of which is armor piercing, 38 armor, which is very, very respectable. These guys are available at the start of the campaign, of course. So very useful units. I would highly, highly recommend these units, and just take a look at some of the new assets over there, that beautiful cuirass. No matter how much I look at this unit, I absolutely fall in love with this unit because it's one of the most unique units in the game, and it even got more unique with the public beta 1.3.5 because the Celts no longer have two-handed swordsmen. So the only two-handed swordsmen that I can remember are the ones from the Mauryan faction. Moving on to the next unit, we have the two-handed macemen. Now these are Kshatriya warriors. They come from the first class population, 200 men in the unit. Pretty self-explanatory stats. They have 14 melee attack, just 3 melee defense, but the overall weapon damage is unmatched in the game. Overall weapon damage of 42, 20 of which is armor piercing. For those of you who have watched my other series, you know that I consider 30 weapon damage to be a good benchmark. Now these guys are well above that 30 benchmark. They're 42 with 20 being armor piercing. Decent armor at 38, which is the best armor value you'll have on Mauryan units. And one of the changes I have made to this unit is that I have increased the movement speed of this unit. So they are no longer a slow moving maceman unit. They're actually quite fast moving, because it doesn't make sense for a two-handed unit that doesn't have a shield to move slowly. In fact, if you take a look at how much a two-handed mace wears, it's typically about the same as a long sword. So it's not going to be that heavy. The only difference is, of course, the weight distribution being concentrated on the tip of the weapon rather than, you know, a sword, which tends to be much more better balanced. But the main thing that actually slows down infantry movement is your huge, heavy and cumbersome shields. This obviously takes a lot of energy to hold on to, and of course it is inhibiting free movement. So definitely a unit like this deserves to have that speed 3, and they are absolutely amazing. They do come from that first class population. If I had to choose between Shreni Yoda and the Macemen, it's, you know, it's really difficult to choose between these two guys. Both are really good. Of course, the first class population unit has better stats. Apart from that, they have insane damage versus elephants at 34. And if you add that up with the 42 weapon damage, you're looking at 76 damage versus elephants. So these guys can absolutely shred elephants. Next up, you have, you know, the Mauryan Kshatriya warriors. Now, these guys are the broadsword warriors. They do come with a precursor javelin, which is basically a trident, as you can see over here, which has good armor piercing value when they throw. Their armor is just 35, which is slightly lower, but they have been adjusted to have insane attacking value. So these guys extremely aggressive. They can serve as frontline troops, but they have crazy melee attack, decent melee defense at 14, and a crazy sword entry at 34, 2 of which is armor piercing. So these guys absolutely insane. Their movement speed is a little bit slow, but they do have high charge resistance. One thing you might notice is that we do not have the Mauryan Royal Bodyguard as a recruitable unit anymore, and that's because it has been relegated to purely a general unit. The same goes for the Mauryan Royal Bodyguard Cavalry unit. However, moving on to the next group, we have our Spear Infantry, beginning with our Mauryan Spearmen. Now these guys, nothing much to talk about, nothing really great going on for them. No armor, pretty low melee stats, and a pretty low weapon damage as well. They do come from that third class population. They are numerous at 300 men in the unit. They are pretty decent at holding the front line. However, they're not going to be too great owing to their armor and low melee stats. But in the early game, pretty useful if you're trying to expend some of your less desirable population classes. Next up, we have a very interesting unit. We have our Auxilia unit, the first foreigner type Auxilia unit. Although they are indigenous to the Indian subcontinent, they are forest dwellers. They do not follow Hinduism. As such, they are not part of the Vedic culture. So these guys come from the fourth class population. Previously, they were 300 men strong. Now they have been reduced to 200 men strong, and that is just because of their stats. I mean, just take a look. I completely designed this unit from scratch to look as tribal Indians look, and you can tell they are deserving of their name, headhunters. As you can see, they do collect heads of their defeated enemies. Keep in mind, you're not going to be seeing all the stats of these units over here, because I have turned on a no stealth submod so that these units do not crouch in the grass, which would make them a lot harder to visualize, because not only do they crouch, but they are actually pretty well camouflaged. So actually in the game, when you see these guys in stalk mode, they are pretty hard to spot because they actually blend quite well with the foliage. In fact, if I just like angle them a little bit up like here, you can see already quite difficult to see these guys. But a very interesting thing about these guys is they actually have the first bow entry I spoke about, which is the shorter range, faster firing, less damage longbow. They only have 4 precursor ammunition, which means they are intended to fire as quickly as possible into the enemy and then engage in melee. They have the shock spear weapons for a spear, so that means they have more melee attack, less melee defense, and more weapon damage, more of which is going to be armor piercing at 6. Apart from that, since they are population class 4, keep in mind they are going to be capped in the campaign, so you can't just spam these bad boys. But a few other things about their stats: they do have guerrilla deployment, they do have amazing stock abilities, and they also come with the fear ability. So these guys can frighten the enemy, much like several of your Celtic naked warriors. Would I recommend this unit? Absolutely. In terms of flanking, you can see it has the speed, very high speed of 5, but the charge resistance extremely low. As you can tell, these guys aren't very heavily armored, don't have a shield, so they're not going to be able to take on enemy cavalry charges. So just be careful how you use these guys, but they are really effective on the flanks. Next up, we have the auxiliary Avantian spearmen, another auxiliary unit, but this one is Vedic, as you can tell. They do practice the Hindu culture. They come from the second class population. They have 300 men in the unit, pretty respectable stats, really good charge resistance, pretty good speed, medium speed of 3. Pretty medium melee stats of melee attack of 7, defense of 17. Weapon damage is at 26, which is a little bit lower than the benchmark, but in case of spearmen, you tend to have a little bit lower melee damage. Apart from that, of course, you do have the relevant bonuses versus cavalry and elephants. These guys are going to be your bread and butter frontline troops. Now, all of these auxiliary troops actually come from auxiliary barracks, so it's in order to actually access them, you have to build or invest in an auxiliary barracks. Core Mauryan citizens, like any of the units that you see the Mauryan name attached to, will come from your core barracks, but any of the units that come from or that have the auxiliary title attached to it, regardless of whether it falls under the Vedic umbrella or the foreigner class, you will have to recruit from the auxiliary barracks. Apart from that, of course, this being a population class 2 auxiliary, they are unlimited in number, so you can get as many of these units, and these are going to be your main frontline units for the early game. However, speaking of the late game, you have the Mauryan late armored spearmen. These guys 200 men strong. Before, they were accessible right at the start of the campaign. However, for now, since we do have an extra spear unit, I have relegated these guys to a reform type unit, kind of simulating how they were influenced by Hellenic culture. These guys do not have the phalanx or the shield wall ability, but they do come with the defensive formation, which actually bumps up their armor from 30 to 45. Very respectable stats. 8 melee attack, about 19 melee defense if we disable the shield wall. Overall weapon damage of 28, which is really good for a spear unit, and pretty decent movement speed. So even though they have heavy armor and a big heavy shield, they're not as effective as hoplite units, but they are going to be faster moving than your hoplite units, and definitely one of the recommended units as your frontline units, especially in the late game. Moving on to the next section, another section in which the Mauryans shine. You have a missile infantry, the very first option being the auxiliary tribal slingers. Once again, capped unit coming from the 4th class population, not part of the Vedic culture. These guys are a slinger unit. I'm not going to talk about them too much because they are not as elite as, of course, your tribal headhunters. Pretty mediocre stats, only 165 range for a slinger unit, which is not that impressive. Despite coming from that 4th class population, I wouldn't really recommend these guys on the field of battle. Next up, you have the Mauryan skirmisher unit. Now, these guys, pretty decent skirmisher unit. 200 men in the unit, that's the key takeaway. So they're slightly bigger in number. They do come from, I guess, the 3rd, if not the 2nd class. Okay, it says Shudra over here, so the 3rd class population, quite respectable for that. They do have that bamboo precursor javelin, 6 ammunition, pretty decent missile damage and missile range. Apart from that, they do have a little bit of melee capabilities. They carry broadswords as well as long shields, giving them decent protection against enemy missiles. Not that much armor, so I would use these guys as early flanking units because they do have that speed 5, which means they are extremely fast on the battlefield. They can expend their ammunition really quickly and then close in to get into melee, but they cannot fight toe-to-toe, so just keep that in mind. Would I recommend this unit? Absolutely, in the early game. But of course, as the Mauryans, you do have all of your longbowmen the remaining 4 units. These guys are going to be the main focus, of course, when it comes to missile units for the Mauryans. Speaking of the longbowmen, the first ones you have are your Mauryan reserve longbowmen. 200 men, once again, very numerous, coming from that third class population. They have a range of 190, which indicates that they have the second tier of longbow, and that is basically the bamboo longbows, as you can see over here. Pretty good missile damage. Nothing much else to talk about. Pretty standard, quick moving missile infantry, not that much charge resistance, so they'll get absolutely slaughtered by cavalry, so you got to keep these guys pretty safe. But they come from the third class population, have 200 men in the unit, and have pretty decent range and missile damage. So yes, I would totally recommend these guys if you cannot afford population class 2 units. Speaking of population class 2 units, the next are the trained longbowmen. Now these guys do come from the second class population. They have the better curved, slightly recurved composite longbow, which means they have the first tier bow entry for the Mauryan faction, which means they have a range of 210, which rivals the Balearic Slinger and the Rhodian Slinger range. So keep in mind, these archers have an insane range for an archer unit, rivaling that of Slinger units, and pretty decent missile damage as well. 17, 2 of which is armor piercing, so pretty good. But once again, not that really great in versus cavalry. But these guys, once they get rid of their missiles, they do have some melee capability, nothing too fancy, but they do have decent melee damage at 28, 2 of which is armor piercing, so these guys can be pretty decent at flanking, but I doubt that you'll get to use them for flanking because for most of the battle they will have quite a lot of ammunition to burn through, and of course their rate of fire is not going to be that fast. You can see only 5 shots per minute, so pretty slow in comparison to these guys who have 6 shots per minute. So it's going to take a while for these guys to expend their ammunition and then get into melee. Next up, you have another auxiliary unit, again a Vedic culture unit, this time from South India, the Dravidian warriors. These guys are not a pure missile unit. As such, you can see the shots per minute is actually 8, really fast. They only have precursor ammunition of 4, which means the intention for them is to expend the ammunition as quickly as possible. They do come from that second class population, Vedic culture, so that means unlimited auxilia in this case as well. Their main focus is, of course, their melee capabilities. They come with a sickle sword, and a small buckler. Extremely aggressive as far as their melee stats are concerned. 13 melee attack, 8 melee defense, overall weapon damage of 32, 7 of which is armor piercing. Really high movement speed, but low charge resistance. So quite obviously a very good flanking type unit. Would highly recommend these units. Next up, we have the final missile unit. These are the late armored longbowmen, as you can see over here. These guys are a direct upgrade of the trained longbowmen. They also come from the second class population. The only difference of this unit being the additional armor that they get. So they now have 25 armor, so they're a little bit more capable of dealing in a missile versus missile engagement, because they will be able to soak up some of that missile damage, as you can see. And would I recommend these guys? Absolutely. One of the best archer units out there in the entire game. But of course, keep in mind they do have that slow rate of fire. Next up, we're going to move on to the 2 cavalry sections. We have the melee and the missile cavalry. Might seem like a lot, but you'll understand that it's actually quite limited. Starting with our melee cavalry, we have the auxiliary Sauverian lancers. Once again, a Vedic Indian auxiliary unit, so they come from the second class population. Keep in mind, all of the Mauryan cavalry is only 100 men strong, because the Mauryans did not have a strong cavalry tradition. In fact, India as a whole did not have a strong cavalry tradition until much later in the medieval ages. So you will see that the cavalry is actually a weak point for the Mauryans. But speaking of which, you have the Sovereign Lancers. Geographically speaking, they were the westernmost or the northwesternmost portion of India, which was under the control of the Achaemenids and then the Alexandrian Argead Empire. So these guys do have some cavalry traditions. As you can see, they are very typical shock cavalry. Nothing much to talk about in terms of stats. Pretty mediocre armor, 13, mediocre melee stats, pretty decent on the charge, medium strength and medium speed. So wouldn't really recommend these guys. They do come from that second class population and are unlimited. So next up, we have the auxiliary Gandharan cavalry. Now, these guys are foreigners, Mlecha. They are previously used to be Indians, but were kind of relegated or kind of ostracized from Indian society for siding with the wrong, team in the Mahabharata. For those of you who do not know, the Mahabharata is an epic. And of course, a historical, depends on how you'd like to see it. It's a historical writing or a record of what happened in the Indian subcontinent in the mid-1000th century, so 1500 BC. So these guys fought on the wrong side, were relegated, and as such became increasingly Hellenized and Persianized, as you can see. Coming from that fourth class population, they are capped. They are a pretty decent melee infantry, but they do come with precursor ammunition of javelins. These guys are the former Cambodian cavalry, because I've repurposed the Cambodian cavalry. Instead, these guys are the Gandharan cavalry. Pretty good on that movement speed, pretty decent on the charge, but nothing too fancy. I would definitely recommend these guys though, because they're a bit like Tarentine cavalry, albeit with slightly lower stats. Next up, we have the Balkian or the Bahalikia cavalry, as I like to call in my native language. These guys are, from the city of Balkh. Again, foreigners. Balkh in Afghanistan was named after Bahalika, the legendary figure in the Mahabharata. Once again, sided with the wrong party, exiled from the Vedic culture group, so as such considered as Mlecha now, heavily Persianized and of course Hellenized, as you can tell from the appearance. Very, very good cavalry. 41 armor, a spear shield cavalry, so they're very good against enemy cavalry. 10 melee attack, 15 melee defense. Of course, that spear entry at 32 weapon damage, 5 of which is armor piercing, and you can see the bonus versus cavalry. Low movement speed owing to their high armor, but pretty high charge strength, so these guys are going to be absolutely good versus enemy cavalry, but keep in mind they are limited. Next up, we have a new unit, the Cambodians, that have been repurposed into what the Cambodians historically were as per the records. They were very heavy shock cavalry that, of course, once again, fought on the wrong side and were actually ostracized from the Vedic culture group. As such, they are considered Mlecha, coming from that fourth class population. Just 100 men in the unit, so very good unit, very good shock unit. Not really anti-cavalry unit, more of an anti-infantry focus, but they can do quite well against enemy cavalry on the charge. But if you get stuck in a protracted engagement, these guys are going to lose. Apart from that, you can see that they have a really good charge bonus, 62 weapon damage, typical of a Lancer unit, with 12 being armor piercing, 19 being base damage. Armor value is pretty good, pretty high at 51, which is one of the highest armors available to cavalry unit. They are classified as a half cataphracti, which means they are not completely encased. But they're pretty powerful, and these guys are unlocked in the reform, so they're not available at the start of the game, but they do come from that Pop 4 unit, and they are quite comparable to your Nicaean cavalry of the Parthians, your steppe cavalry, as well as some of your Diadochi cavalry like the Bactrians, as well as the Seleucids. Historically, these guys had access to Nicaean mounts, but I think, giving them that entity would make them a bit too powerful, and the Mauryan faction, as you can probably tell by now, is already quite powerful. But despite that fact, they do have a very high charge strength. Of course, the tooltip over here is wrong, but you can tell it's light green, which means they have A-tier charge strength. So it should actually say very high charge strength. And one thing you might notice is that the color of the text in the tooltip actually reflects the indication of the icon over here. So let's just have a very quick look over here. So over here you see a charge speed of or a movement speed of 2, which is low, which means it's going to show as orange. Charge strength of dark green, which is high, so it's going to show as dark green for high. Conversely, if you look at the missile infantry, you'll see that they have, even you can look at the icon here, it's a little bit bigger and easier to see. You see the movement speed is 5, which is very high, so green color. And the charge resistance is red, which is very low, so the same. So a bit nice thing that Cam has done there to make it very intuitive. Of course, it takes some getting used to. But as far as the game is concerned, all you need to do is you need to check your stats. You need to quickly mouse over, especially if you're going to charge. You're going to see, okay, I have light green. He has just dark green, which means I am going to come out on top as far as the charge is concerned. Or I have light green. He has red, so it's going to be an absolute slaughter if I charge against him. And so forth. And if you're going to have to take a quick look at which cavalry can catch up to which cavalry, just take a look. Okay, both of these are speed 2, so, if one is giving chase to another, it's going to be indefinite. Meanwhile, over here, you can see this cavalry has speed 3, so there's no chance I'm going to catch up to this cavalry, so I might as well not bother. However, that being said, let's move on to the next group. These are the missile cavalry. Once again, you can see not that strong cavalry tradition. This is the Mauryan skirmisher cavalry from the core roster. Nothing much to talk about. It's a Pop 2 cavalry unit, so not at all worth the population class. And in fact, like most factions getting access to early Pop 2 skirmisher cavalry, this cavalry is pretty mediocre in terms of stats. However, it's even more mediocre because most of those factions actually have 120 horse riders, whereas over here you only have, a mere 100, so definitely not worth it. Next up, you have a slightly upgraded version of the skirmisher cavalry that you have over here, but these guys are auxiliary Indic, coming from that second class population. Slightly better, more respectable stats. Again, just 100 men in the unit, coming from Pop 2, of course. These are your Sindhian cavalry, coming from the region of Sindh, which is in modern day Pakistan. They were, definitely Hellenized and had a lot of Iranian culture owing to their subjugation at the hands of the Achaemenid as well as the Argain. Decent weapon damage, which means they do have some, anti-cavalry ability, especially after expending some of their missiles. So these guys can be quite useful, but once again, not anything fancy. As you can see, out of all the cavalry options we have, and we have covered so far, only 3 of them are spammable, and all of them are very mediocre. So your cavalry is not a strong point whatsoever. Next up, you do have a reformed cavalry unit. These are your Saka horse archers. These guys are a horse archer unit with a little bit of a charge capability, nothing too fancy. As you can tell from the icon over here, medium charge, medium speed, but they're very good at skirmishing. They have 170 range, 18 missile damage, so really powerful missiles over there, 6 of which is armor piercing, so even more powerful. 41 armor, really respectable for a horse archer unit. Medium speed, which means they should be around 7 speed as far as movement is concerned, which is quite fast for a cavalry unit. These guys actually are a copy paste of the Yuechi cavalry units that are available to the Mesekete faction, and that is because historically speaking, India, at least northwestern India, was conquered by the Greco-Bactrians, which was in turn conquered by the Kushans or the Yuechi or the Saka. So you had the Indo-Sakas, so these guys kind of reflect that of the Indo-Sakas being introduced during the reforms, once again coming from that 4th class population, because these guys, as you can tell, foreign auxilia, but being foreign auxilia, they are capped, so you can't really spam horse archer armies as the Indians. I mean, you could technically spam half a horse archer army, but then you wouldn't have these guys available for any of the other armies in your campaign. Next up, we have 2 chariot units. The second chariot unit, which is the Mauryan heavy armored chariot, I'm not going to cover because it's the identical one as the general unit that I covered, coming from that first class population, 40 men in the unit. Did not recommend it as a general unit because it's a little bit of a glass cannon, but I would highly recommend it on the field of battle because they can dish out quite a lot of damage if used right. Apart from that, the very first chariot unit we have is a population class 2 light chariot that is available, before the reforms. I believe these chariots are kind of locked to the reforms. I don't think they should be, but they are locked behind the reforms. No, they are not locked behind the reforms. They are available at the start of the game. It's these guys who get disabled after the reforms because, chariot warfare in India was going to be phased out. So it makes no sense for these guys to be there. Would I recommend these guys? 60 men in the unit. They do have a pretty decent missile damage. I wouldn't really recommend them because they're not going to be able to do too much on the charge. Light chariots really struggle to push past enemy units because the main focus of chariots is to keep moving through enemy formations so that you have the trample effect, as you see over here, or the mighty knockback effect, which causes extra damage as you keep pushing enemies around. And you're not going to be pushing a lot of enemies around when you have extremely light mass, so definitely wouldn't recommend this unit, but would recommend this unit especially if you're really good at your micromanagement. Next up, we have the elephant units. We made it almost to the end, and with the elephant units, you have 3 elephant units: the reserve elephants, the armored elephants, and the armored war elephants. Keep in mind, you cannot spam your royal war elephants. These are purely general units. But in your spammable options, you have 3 units, and of course they have been changed visually. As you can see, a lot of new assets looking really beautiful over here right now. With the peacock feathers and so forth. But just a quick summary of the elephant units. All are really good as opposed to other factions that come with 18 elephants. Each unit comes with 24 elephants. In the case of the armored war elephants, these guys actually show 48 instead of 24, and that's because they come with an additional warrior atop the howdah, equipped with the recurved longbow, the best tier bow available to the Mauryan faction. However, if we have to talk about the population class, the reserve elephants actually come from population class 3, the only population class 3 elephants in the entire game. Followed by, of course, you have the armored elephants coming from your population class 2, and your armored war elephants coming from, once again, the second class population. So very powerful second class population elephant unit. Most of the elephant units in the game actually come from the second class population. But the Mauryans conversely get easy access to these elephant units because, the equivalent of this unit are the Seleucid Syrian war elephants or the Bactrian Indian armored elephants. But those guys are only, you can only recruit them from your stable level 4, which means you have to actually research to unlock the stable, and then you need to spend 16 turns just to build the stable. However, these bad boys are available right from the second level of stable, so the Indians get early access to really powerful elephant units, whereas these guys, the reserve elephants, are available from their very first level of stable. So that's just how powerful Mauryan elephants are. Now, as far as the elephant you should go with, or my personal recommendation, obviously is going to be the Mauryan armored war elephant, but all of them are quite good. You basically just want to go with the best that you can afford. So if you cannot afford the armored war elephants, then just go for the armored elephants, and if you cannot even afford the armored elephants, go for the reserve elephants. But all of them are going to do quite well. Of course, that being said, we are done with the section. And it's been pretty long, as I told you, of course. So thank you all for watching, but we are going to move on to the next section, in which I cover my personal recommendations for the Mauryan army. Alright, welcome to section 3 of the guide, in which we are going to face off, or where I'm going to talk about my personal recommendations for the Mauryan army composition, and then we're going to face off against a typical Roman legion. Now, firstly, what I'd like to do is I'd like to select my general. No brainer, it's going to be the Mauryan war elephant. And then I'm going to select my cavalry. We're going to select another elephant unit. We're going to select a couple of these Cambodian shock cavalry. They are capped even in the custom battle, so you can't spam these guys. The same with the horse archers. You can't really spam them, so that's something you got to keep in mind. And then we're going to go for a chariot unit because they're really good, especially against enemy skirmishers. Then we're going to focus on our archers, get a couple of the armored archers, and we're going for the most elite type units because we are facing off against a Roman Marian legion. In order to have an early game composition, you can just replace some of these guys with the early game options. For example, if I have to replace this elephant unit, I will go for a much easier, cheaper elephant unit, one of those two. If I have to replace these reformed cataphract lancers, I will go for the Sovereign instead. However, just keep that in mind that the composition remains relatively the same in my opinion. Just a few things change here and there. Next up, after you get these, you might think we only have 2 missile units as the Mauryans. That is not that ideal. But the good thing is that you have a lot of hybrid units like the auxiliary Dravidian warriors, as well as the tribal headhunters that also have precursor missiles, so they are going to be contributing to the overall missile output of your army. Then apart from that, you want to build up your flanking troops, so these are your shock troops. So we're going to go for the armored macemen as well as the Shreni Yoda, and we're just going to adjust it a bit like so. Then we're going to focus on our core front line. I suggest 2 of these late armored spearmen, 3 of these Kshatriya warriors, another 2 of these spearmen, so basically protecting the flanks of the Kshatriya swordsmen. And then finally the right hand flanking force, which is going to be a maceman unit and an armored spearman. So what we're going to do is just slightly shift these units around so we have that perfect formation. So this is our core infantry, beginning with our left flank of flanking units, then our core infantry that will hold the line, and then our right flanking units. And then of course all of these units are our support troops, basically our cavalry as well as missile troops. Of course, one of the things you want to consider is that the Mauryans are not going to be very cavalry heavy, so you have just about 2 cavalry units. The Mauryans are more about just crushing the enemy as quickly as you can, because the quicker you crush your enemy, the more casualties you're going to deal. You don't really have to even chase your enemies around too much. However, that being said and done, we're gonna have to focus on the population classes I've chosen over here. We're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 first class population units, and you might think that's a bit much, and that is true. It's going to be hard to get access to these units, but this is the ideal composition you want. In order to help a little bit with your population class, you can replace the Kshatriya warriors with the Avanti swords or the Malayan heavy infantry instead. But I highly recommend these units because, as you see, we're not going to be taking too many casualties on these units in the battle because we're going to use them very effectively, and the bulk of the enemy attention is going to be redirected to our late armored spearmen. So we have 6 first class population. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 second class population unit. We have 1, 2, 3 foreign auxilia. So this is definitely my recommended army composition for the Mauryans. And without any further ado, let us hop into the battle, and we will see how this army composition faces off against a Roman legion. Alright, welcome to the battle. We are going to be playing this in real time so that you guys can witness how I micromanage my armies. I like to keep the zoom out as much as possible because it makes micromanaging a lot easier. As you can see, I can click between different units quite easily when zoomed out entirely. Of course, I do get a comprehensive view of the battle as well. The more zoomed in you are, of course, if you're playing a little bit on easy mode where you're not caring too much about perfect micromanagement, it's going to be harder to select your units, but you will enjoy the beautiful visuals. Unfortunately, we're not going to be seeing the beautiful visuals in this battle because we are going to be focusing on maximizing your micromanagement. So the first thing I like to do is set up my flanks. So we start off with the cavalry on the flanks. We don't have that many cavalry, of course, so what we're going to do is just very quickly deselect all of this. So select our general supporting unit of Cambodian heavy lancers. On the right flank we have our other elephants as well as our other Cambodian cavalry, and we are going to select our chariots as well. We're going to put them over here. Bit of a messy situation I'm doing that with. And now we want to select our core infantry units. We want to reduce the formation width, hold down the control and the up arrow key. We can increase the width of this Dravidian auxiliary spearmen, of course. And then we want to select, I guess we can select all of these units like so. Then we can select all of these units as well. Just put them up over here. Get these guys a little bit in the center. Take our Kshatriya warriors, put them up behind. And then we want to select the other spear unit. Perfect. And then we have the Dravidian units. We're going to select them up over here. Actually, all of these three units form the last group. And we just put them up here. We get the Dravidians slightly increase their formation width. There we go. Perfect. And last, we want our archers all the way in the back. And we're going to select all of our core infantry that we do not want to get out of position. Toggle on that guard mode. So there we have it. And that is the final formation. Of course, we have to adjust the width of our elephant units. So let's just go ahead and do that. And we also want to adjust the width of our chariot units. Toggle on that melee mode so that they get involved in the melee. Now, this is what I like to call my 5-finger strategy, because you have 5 fingers in one hand. And if you curl them up, you can punch the enemy. However, that being said, we have the first finger, which is the far left flank, which is our cavalry on the left flank. On the exact opposite side, mirroring them, we have the right flank of cavalry. We just want to move them out in a slight oblique order, with, of course, the most strong unit in the front of that order, and the weaker units slightly protected by that strong unit. And the reason we keep them out fanned out like this rather than one behind the other is so that when they move, they do not collide into each other. They have a clear movement path that does not obstruct each other. Then we're going to talk about our core infantry that's over here, but these can be divided into the other 3 fingers, beginning with our immediate left flank, which is consisting of our flanking units, such as our Mauryan armored macemen, as well as our Mauryan guild warriors. Then we have our core infantry, all of these guys in the middle. We have spearmen in a little bit of an advanced position, our Kshatriya warriors in the middle, and our archers all the way in the back protected. Our Kshatriya warriors a little bit recessed because we want the enemy to focus all of their missile damage onto our spearmen, because they come from that second class population, so we can afford to lose a little bit of these guys. And on top of that, they do have that defensive formation which allows them to tank even more missiles. Meanwhile, our Kshatriya warriors a little bit behind, so they're protected at least from the missile fire. And should the enemy melee decide to funnel into the Kshatriya warriors, we do have our auxiliary tribal headhunters, as well as our auxiliary Dravidian mercenaries to quickly assist our Kshatriya warriors and alleviate the pressure. We want our Kshatriya warriors to be on the offensive rather than a defensive front line. So this is what you would consider a defensive front line. They're a little bit more advanced. Our offensive front line kind of reacts to the situation depending on how the situation develops. Meanwhile, the immediate right flank, which is the last remaining finger of this formation, consists of our right flankers. They are the Mauryan Kshatriya macemen, the two-handed mace unit, as well as the other group of armored macemen. Now these guys are going to move all the way around and assist our spearmen try to alleviate the pressure as quickly as possible. And the reason they are in such a narrow formation is it makes the maneuvering a lot easier, and then they can just charge into the enemy. If you have a wider formation like so, of course, the extrememost end of the formation has to pivot long distance, which means the movement is going to be cumbersome. So if you want a more frontline coverage, you want to spread out your units, this is the way to go about it. If you want medium maneuverability, you want more of a square formation. This kind of allows you to respond quickly while yet maintaining some level of unit cohesion, whereas this one is the one that responds the fastest, and then you can just simply attack the enemy. Now, why our core infantry is all the way in the back is because we're going to buy enough time for our cavalry units to actually engage the enemy cavalry, since we do have a superior support troops like our elephants, as well as our chariots, as well as our heavy cavalry. The objective is to get rid of the Roman cavalry, which will be on the flanks, and the sooner we can do that, then all of our units are free to assist our infantry in the final clash of infantry versus infantry, thereby reducing the time we face off against the more experienced Roman legions and reducing our casualties while dealing significant morale penalties against the Romans. However, that being said and done, let's just quickly unpause the battle. We are going to go ahead and just move our troops all the way up forward, and just going to take a look at that. Perfect. So very quickly over here, we'll take a look at the Roman formation. You can see that they have the cavalry. They have 4 cavalry units with the inclusion of the general. General's going to be a little bit hard to get to. However, the other cavalry is going to be quite easy. Now, there are one of 2 things the enemy AI can do that I've seen is, one is that they will engage in the cavalry engagement. So infantry will pretty much try to support their cavalry against ours. But the second thing they can do, and this most likely to happen, is that they will actually ignore our units and try to make a move towards my infantry units, and that is actually going to be harder to manage. And the reason they usually do this is because they register that we have greater range with our Mauryan longbowmen, so they're trying to close the distance. So there you have it. You have a little bit of movement over here happening with the enemy units. We're gonna try to stay as close as possible. I can see that they are kind of abandoning their units over here, but they're going for my general, so we're gonna pull out a little bit, try not to get too close to them, but we're not gonna move out too far out because we do not want to be in a very sticky situation. We're gonna charge over here. We're definitely gonna charge that one over there, and we're gonna pull back our cavalry as quickly as possible. This is a little bit concerning because I really do not know what the enemy AI is thinking of doing. So we're just gonna go ahead, charge over here. Perfect. Let's get this charge in. Come on, come on. There we go. Okay, I do not think they're focusing on my general, so that's a little bit of a safety over there. So we can just go ahead, keep charging at these units. It's good that they're facing their backs towards me, because that means I can dish out quite some serious damage over here. We're gonna quickly just attack over here. We have some of the sword units moving towards me. Just ignore the units that are in full retreat and keep attacking, keep hitting hard over here. That's perfect. So they are slowly wheeling in towards my infantry as expected. So we're just going to readjust my infantry a little bit. So there we have it. We're going to move our cavalry out of dodge over there. The elephants have done quite well. So we're going to move our elephant units back in. Cavalry can go over there. We don't really have to give chase over here, but we definitely have to prevent their cavalry from engaging our cavalry. Now here we have the first cohort. Can get rid of them as well. It's going to be pretty clutch. Meanwhile, we just chase as much as we possibly can. We don't want their cavalry to get a hold of us. So there we go. We charged in with our elephants. We're going to move out of there, charge in. Once again, just cycling. Okay, we see a weakness over here, so we're going to exploit that, and we're going to charge over here with both of our units. Okay, so the elephants have gotten in. We're going to move them on to the cavalry. Just go ahead, quickly charge with, once again, with the first cohort. There you have it. Okay, wonderful, wonderful charge over there on the general. Just quickly go ahead, attack over here. Go ahead, charge once again. Chariot units doing quite well. Can also keep moving. You're going to do quite a lot of damage over here. So there you have it. Wonderful attack. We're going to assist. We can see a lot of them just shattering. There we go. That's exactly what we like to see. We can move our chariots back in that direction so that they keep doing some damage. And there we have it. Massive, massive, massive break over there. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. So there we're just going to go. We're going to move all of our cavalry over here. We've dealt with all of the enemy support troops, and this is a little bit concerning. We're going to get these guys into a defensive formation real quick. Get these guys into a defensive formation real quick. Start moving them up across. Hurry up. Okay, there we go. We're going to move up our Kshatriya warriors. Move up all the way over here. Move up our defensive troops real quick. We're going to start forming up so that we can attack, and chariots can go about chasing those units. We can group both of our cavalry in group 3. We can group both of our elephants group 1. So we have new micromanagement. That's a lot more effective. Let's go ahead. Just engage the enemy units. Try to pin them down. There we go. And Kshatriya warriors almost done. Almost engaging. We definitely want to start getting involved in the fighting. So you can see pretty much over here not much is happening, but some of our spearmen taking quite a bit of casualties. We're going to start following that up with attacks by our Kshatriya warriors, and we're going to start quickly encircling over here. And now that the enemy is completely engaged, we can go ahead, just attack these guys over here, form up over there, and go ahead, attack these guys over here. Get moving over there quickly. Perfect. Wonderful. And we can also move this unit into the gap over here. Just get it out. Okay, perfect. And get a general smack into that. These guys, they should lose decisively. There we go. Big routing happening over there. Quickly move our elephants. We do not want them to get bogged down. And over here, we're going to try to attack these units very quickly. Let's just go ahead. Just keep attacking. Come on, keep attacking. Don't get bogged down. And there we go. We have a massive rout over here. Very little casualties. You can see most of them have been completely routed out. We're going to continue the battle. We're going to give chase to as much as possible. Our general unit, we're going to try to chase over here. Quick look to see where everyone is. All right, that's 26 men. And we can actually increase the speed over here. Just get our chariots up. Cancel our archers from friendly fire, of course. We do not want that to happen. Just a quick look to see over here. Chariots, we can group you as number 4 now. Just makes it a little bit easier for me to access. We're going to move all the way over there. General. There we go. Perfect. So we go ahead, we get these guys. And we go ahead, get those guys. So, yep, that's it. Done and dusted. Easy victory. There we go. Done quite a lot of casualties with all of our units, but we'll go into the end of the battle screen just in a bit. We're just going to mop up these guys as quickly as possible. And there we have it. We can go ahead and just end the battle. And I will see you all in the next screen. And there you have it. Just look at that. Just 149 men lost. Meanwhile, the Romans have lost almost their entire legion. The cavalry managed to escape just their first cohort, which was taken out of the battle quite early, and I didn't bother to give chase. And of course, one of their legionary units. So they've been absolutely annihilated. A lot of the units have not been able to do any damage. I mean, the most a unit has done in damage is a couple of these infantry units with 21 and 21. But if we take a look at our own stats, you'll just see how insane it is. So, of course, you have our chariots doing the maximum amount, 514 kills just to perfection. Our own Cambodian lancers done quite well, 300 apiece. Elephants about 400 apiece, with our general slightly higher than, of course, our other elephant unit. As far as our flanking units, you can tell that we have done quite a lot with our flanking units. Our Dravidians and tribal auxiliary, they did not get involved that quickly because, they were still in that missile phase, although I kind of forced them to get involved in the fighting. And of course, our two-handed macemen with 291 kills, that's absolutely insane. Our, poster child of the Mauryan armored macemen, 292 in this unit, 179. If you take a look at our losses, we barely lost any first class. We barely lost any foreign class. Our maximum casualties have been sustained by our second class spearmen, as I had predicted. In fact, it was one of these spearmen that took the most of damage. And if you just keep in mind, this was the spearman on the left hand side of my Kshatriya line. What that means is that the shield was on the left hand side, if you can kind of visualize it. I'll just do it over the unit card. So their shield would be in their left hand, which means all the missiles came into their unshielded side. So these guys took the most damage, followed by the guys right next to them. Meanwhile, these guys were pretty well protected. Despite taking a lot of missile fire, they were able to tank that missile fire and get involved in the engagement as quickly as possible. But apart from that, this has been the most decisive of any victories I've ever played in a factional overview series. Just 149 losses. That is just how insanely powerful the Mauryans can be when used right. However, I hope you all enjoyed that part of the video, because it was really fun to play it out in real time for you guys. And we're going to hop on to the next section, in which I will be covering my personal recommendations for the general skills as well as the army traditions for the Mauryans. Alright, welcome to part 5, the final part of this episode. We are going to be covering the general skills as well as the army traditions, but before we do that, let's take a look at some of the changes for the Mauryan faction. Of course, I have used Save Parser to give this general the maximum skill rank, as well as the army the maximum skill rank, but we're going to fill that out just in a minute. And of course, it was Bindusara, but he has been edited because of the Save Parser, the way the Save Parser works. But you can see that the Mauryan characters have completely new VMDs, completely new appearances, so they actually look quite amazing, if I should say so myself. Another thing I did mention is the barracks system. So you can see we have 2 chains of infantry barracks. We have the infantry quarters, which basically gives you access to Mauryan units. And you have the auxiliary camp that gives you access to all of the auxiliary units, including the cavalry units. So as you can see, very earlier on, you can get some of the native Indian units, and then as you progress upwards, you get access to some of the more elite foreigner type units, of course. Apart from that, no longer do you have the workshop with which you can build your siege equipments as well as your chariots, and that is because your siege equipments are actually available in your barracks itself at the 3rd level, and your chariots are available in your exotic animals. So your exotic animals include your stables as well as exotic animals, so you get access to your core Mauryan units, which you can see is not that much when it comes to cavalry, but you do get access to your elephant units. And as you can see, the first level itself gives you access to the Mauryan reserve elephant, and the second one gives you access to even the armored as well as the armored war elephants. So really good over there. And of course, finally, you can also get access to the heavy armored chariots. So that's just a little bit of the change that has happened with the Mauryans, including the general appearances. Apart from that, I have also gone ahead and changed the names of the political parties. You have the Kshatriya or the Warrior Council. You have the Sreni or the Merchant Guilds, which were quite influential for the Indian empires and kingdoms. And lastly, you have the Raja Varga vassals, which are basically all of the vassal kingdoms under the Mauryans. So they do start off with some, predestined party traits, like the Kshatriyas tend to be more militaristic and military inclined. Meanwhile, the Sreni tend to be more mercantile inclined, as you would expect of the merchant class. And finally, of course, the Rakavarga vassals are the hardest to control. They are usually populist, xenophobe, and all of the bad things that you can possibly think of. I have also gone ahead and changed the government type for the Mauryans into the empire government type, because there's no way to change the government type for the Mauryans. So it seems like them having a very harsh government type at the start of the game is really concerning, since instead of the government types, now they do have access to government actions. I have covered this in a previous video, but you have the Hellenic interchange, which gives you advanced technological research rate, but it weakens your image in the eyes of the nobility, so you will get lowered influence with your rival political parties, and it lowers your influence as well, so you will lose out on your influence. And as the Mauryans, you are an empire, so you want to stay at high influence, at beloved government, which is about 65% influence. You start out at 34% influence. The other political action you have is set up colonies. This increases your growth rate even further, in addition to, of course, the growth rate bonus you have from populous growth per turn, which I mentioned is, kind of shown in your buildings rather than, a separate factor over there. You see buildings give a +6 to your growth rate, but you don't really have buildings that increase your growth rate. So you have just this main settlement over here that gives you +1, and a minor eastern hamlet which gives another +1, so that's +2. The growth rate from your faction bonus is actually +4, which is represented in the buildings. Of course, the character present as well as the food surplus does contribute to the growth rate as well. That being said, the next you do have reinforcements, with which if you select this, you get a new and formidable army from the Indian subcontinent to serve you, and they usually typically end up over here at the port of Maurya. So it's quite useful in the early game. You can use them to quickly expand, but in the later game, when you're somewhere over here, getting a new army all the way over here will take incredibly long time to reach, which kind of makes sense because it shouldn't be too overpowered. It doesn't really depend on where your capital is, so the capital at the start of the game is Pura. It just, regardless of the capital, always spawns at Maurya. The last action, of course, you have is spread of Buddhism. What this does is it'll spread Buddhism, even though it's not our state religion. Our state religion is Hinduism, which is not the dominant religion at the start of the game. Even in the province of Makkah, we only have about 30% as opposed to 70% of Persian culture. That is because, historically speaking, this is part of the Great Roshan Desert, present-day Balochistan region, which is, partly in Pakistan and partly in Iran. But, of course, it's not part of the Indian subcontinent, so you don't have a lot of locals over here. But spreading Buddhism, what it'll actually do, it'll actually apply Buddhism to this province, so you will get an increase in Buddhism as a culture over here. But the benefit of it is that it'll actually boost your public order, and it will also boost your chances of establishing diplomatic treaties with your neighbors, because they view Buddhism as a more pacifist sort of a religion, so they tend to like you a bit more. That's the reasoning behind it. However, without any further ado, let us hop into the army traditions and the general skills. General skills are pretty much the same general skills that we have. Of course, we're going to focus on the Mauryans themselves. We're going to go for the military logistician that gives the -15 upkeep cost for all land units. Pretty massive. As you can tell, really impacts the more expensive the units are, the more the impact is. As you can see, this elephant unit costs 483 to upkeep, but now it just costs 275, so you're saving about 200 plus ducats on the elephant, which is absolutely insane. Then we also want to go for the military conscriptor that gives plus 15% replenishment rate. What this means is that you're going to keep the momentum going in your conquest. For those of you who have seen my Alexander series, you will see that it is a masterclass in momentum management, and that is how you expand despite pressure from your adversaries. And of course, don't worry guys, the Alexander series will continue. I am just covering the Mauryan faction. In the next video, I will be covering all of the changes in the 1.3.5 public beta, and then I will resume my Alexander campaign. It's just 2 more episodes left, episode 8 and episode 9, after which that campaign will be concluded. Next up, you want to focus on improving your infantry, because as you remember, the Mauryans have amazing infantry. So before we do that, we can take a quick look at the infantry over here. You can see the weapon damage overall is 32 in the case of these macemen. We have 16 weapon damage, 16 armor piercing damage. But if you take a look over here, you see we have 17 weapon damage for this unit over here on the side, you can see. And that's because of a faction buff. So that is very, very good and powerful. So we're going to go ahead, get the trained swordsman to improve our melee attack rate. Now this makes bumps it up just a little bit, making the melee capabilities a bit better. And then we can focus on the movement speed, because if you remember from our battles, the movement speed was the main difficulty. Of course, we do not have a lot of experienced levy units. We do have some levy tier units over here, but most of our units are not going to be levy tier units. So it's not really fully worth it to get this unit or this drill master ability. But the movement speed is the only reason I would actually get this, because we actually lack a lot of movement speed. So we want to really definitely get this for the movement speed, and more importantly, it also gives experience gain per turn for the army, so that actually increases the chevron rating passively for each of your units, which can improve their combat capabilities. Cavalry, we don't really have a lot of cavalry, so we really don't need to focus on cavalry. So for the first time ever, we're going to ignore this, and instead we're going to go for the experienced archers that actually increases the shots per minute, because keep in mind we have powerful archers but low shots per minute. It also increases the missile range for all of our units, so we're going to fire even greater than 210, and we also get a lot more missile damage, so we're effectively making our Mauryan longbowmen into kind of like long-range Grecian archers with that ability. Next up, we have 3 more abilities that we can get. We can go for the Commander of Men and go for the movement speed once again, because we want to bump up our movement speed as much as possible. And there we have it. We have both of our movement speed boosts, +6 over here and +9%, so that's a total of +15% movement speed, which is going to make our units a lot more faster. Unfortunately, we can't really see how that impacts with the new system, but it does impact the unit, so you don't have to worry about that. And for the last ability, you have one of 2 options. You can either go for the extra ammunition, since you do have pretty powerful hitting missile units, but I don't want to focus on that, because of course a lot of your units like your Dravidian warriors, as well as your auxiliary tribal headhunters, the whole point of them is to expend your ammunition as quickly as possible and get into melee. So the more ammunition you have, 30% is pretty huge. So for units with like 4 ammunition, that will bump them up to almost 6 ammunition, which makes their melee engagement just a little bit slower. It does help out for your pure archer units, because they're going to have a significant boost from 15 ammunition to 20. But you just have 2 archers in your entire army if you follow the composition I recommended. However, if you're going for a heavier archer build, then definitely the ammunition will help. The ability I actually recommend getting is the Skill Tactician, because although I didn't use that in the custom battle, which I should have, it does give you the battle rhythm ability, which makes your attack insanely overpowered. So it's a must-have in most of my compositions. I like to get the Skill Tactician because the battle rhythm is by far the most powerful general ability you can possibly have. You can only use it once per battle, but it effectively increases your melee attack and your weapon damage by about 50% for the duration, after which of course your units get fatigued. But that 50% boost to your overall weapon damage, say you have a weapon damage of 30, 50% boost makes it 45 weapon damage. And your melee attack, let's say it's at 15, 50% boost makes your melee attack at 22, 23. So it's crazy, guys. It's absolutely crazy. And pretty much after you use the battle rhythm, you should probably end up winning the battle quickly, because you use it at that critical moment just to quickly break the enemy morale, end the battle really quickly, and rack up a lot of kills. However, that being said, we're done with the general abilities for the the Mauryans. We're going to go for my personal recommendations of army skills. So we're going to go for the Relentless Attackers first, and just bear with me because I'm alt-tabbing just to get a line of better view of what exactly. We're going to go for the Subjugators. This kind of gives a bit of ammunition as well for the units. And finally, we're going to go for the Imperial Defenders, because this gives an additional -6 upkeep for all land units. Meanwhile, the Relentless Attackers gives you further replenishment rate. These are the new army traditions you have as the Mauryans, so very, very powerful, synergizes really well with your military conscriptor and military logistician, making your troops all the more cheaper. As you can see, 246 all the way down from 483. So your Mauryan units are going to be super cheap, especially in the late game, because army upkeep is pretty much the majority of your expenditure for the most part in the game. And then after that, you can go ahead and get this ammunition increase. It's going to impact some of your units, but I guess it's a little bit worth it because you don't have any other better options. And then you're going to go for the formidable fighters to improve your melee capabilities, and the indomitable infantry to increase your melee capabilities. Then you are going to go for the accomplished archers that improves your archery, so even more shots per minute, even more missile range, even more missile damage. So at this stage you're gonna pretty much have Cretan longbowmen, as insane as that sounds. And lastly, exotic weapon masters. Interesting if you have chariot units, but the more important thing is that it does give you melee defense for your elephants, which is the most important stat when it comes to elephants, because the melee defense actually prevents your elephants from taking too much damage, which is really important. Then you are going to focus on your Royal Guard line, which is your green line, or your Imperial Defenders. And in the Imperial Defenders, you're going to go for Keepers of the Peace, that gives morale, but more importantly, this unlocks the Arjuna Archers, which gives even more missile damage inflicted by your missile infantry, and it gives even more missile attack range for your infantry. And finally, your finisher is going to be Iron Hard, which means, once again, you're going to inflict more weapon damage and get more morale. So this is +3 weapon damage in addition to the weapon damage you already have. So you can see original weapon damage of Amazement was 16, 16, and now it is 18 and 8 and 16. So this is absolutely insane because it makes your units a lot more capable of dealing damage. So even if I go ahead and replace with, let's say, Ashoka over here, we're going to go ahead and give him a cavalry unit which has a weapon damage of 25 and 9, but you can see just by selecting him he's getting that boost in weapon damage to 26 and 9, so that's absolutely crazy. With that, these are my personal recommendations that synergizes well with the Mauryan factions, the general skills, as well as, of course, the army traditions. You can see, our macemen have gotten a lot better from that 9, 10, all the way up to 11 and 14 in the melee attack and melee defense. Weapon damage overall of 32 has been bumped up to 34, which means they are going to be absolutely powerful. And of course, we don't have a lot of units over here to showcase what exactly happens. Actually, we can still just select them so we can see exactly what happens. And you can see our levy tiered reserve longbowmen have a range of 201, and more importantly, let's see if I can retain that. Yeah, perfect. The missile damage is now 17, which is equal to the top tier, bow that we have as the Mauryan. So shot per minute has been bumped up from 6 to 7, so they're pretty fast, and definitely, really good composition right there. And as you can see, once again with our Mauryan axemen, let's just go ahead and select that. The melee attack has been bumped up from 14 to 17. A melee defense from 3 to 5. The overall weapon damage from 36 is now bumped up to 39, which is insane. So you can see that just makes them super powerful. Really powerful faction that you can have. You can really enjoy the faction and really have a great time playing it. Of course, I'm not going to be describing all of the changes I made. I do recommend you guys try out the Mauryans. They have never been in a better state. Absolutely fun faction to try out, and I absolutely had the greatest time modding them for your pleasure. With that being said and done, we are done with the video. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you liked the video, then like the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you are interested for more. Peace and love.